It's like a bright light was shining on me there for a moment. I don't know. It was weird. My name is Heidi, and I am an alcoholic. First, I'd like to thank Dennis, who called me and said, hey, will you come to Bluestone? And then he told me that it was Cindy, and it's going to probably choke me up, that gave my name. And that Cindy was my first sponsor in AA. She was my first teacher, and for her to invite me to come here was just such an honor. So thank you to the group, to the committee. It's always an honor and a privilege, to give back. It's a responsibility, right, to give back. And a way that I like to start the meeting is they said that somebody asked Lois Wilson what she did in the moment of silence, like before the Serenity Prayer. And she said that what she would do is that she would invite God to the meeting. And it's not that I don't believe that God's not already here, because I think he is, but I think there's something special about asking God into the meeting, that we just experience something completely different. And if you're new here and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even have a God, don't worry, I got your back. I have this God that is so big that you can borrow mine. Like, you can have my God for as long as you need it till you have your own conception. He's pretty funny. You'll find out in my story. Like, it's got a great sense of humor. And I'm sorry, I have to take my shoes off because they're hurting my feet. So we were talking on the way over here, and I said we heard a speaker once say, they take their shoes off because they're standing on holy ground with Alcoholics Anonymous. So he takes his shoes off in honor. And another guy was like, I leave my shoes on because I might burn up if I take them off. So I take mine off and Dave leaves his on. So that's the way that we work this out. So if we could just have a moment of silence and invite God to the meeting, and then we'll get started. Amen. So usually I like to start the meeting in a little controversial way because, I like to stir the pot, I've been told. But I will often, when I start to speak, I will introduce myself as, hi, my name is Heidi. I am a recovered alcoholic. And I don't say that from a place of ego, but I say that from a place of this book, this awesome book that we have. If you had been trying to get sober back in 1940 and you called, Alcoholics Anonymous and said, I need help, they would have sent you this book. And when you open the book, here's what you would have read. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And because of this book, because of the steps, because of the teachers that I have, I can stand here today and I can tell you I have recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind. I no longer have a committee in my head that's going nonstop. I have a quiet mind and a loving heart because of you. And I am so thankful for that. And it tells me that in this book that I'm supposed to, each person will tell you how they have had this personal relationship with God, in their stories, how they've connected with this power. And so that's what I get to do tonight. I get to tell you how I connected with this power. Now, I grew up in a really small town, like they just got a stoplight, so like a couple years ago. Like, it's the middle of nowhere. And I lived on this road that it was one road that my entire family lived on, right? My parents were the best parents. They could not have loved me any more than they loved me, right? You couldn't love me enough, though. Like, there was something mentally wrong with me before I ever picked up a drink. I never felt good enough. I never felt like I fit in. Before I ever went to kindergarten, my parents had taught me really everything we've learned here. They said, you should pray, you should trust God, you should tell the truth. Oh my gosh, like admit when you're wrong, help other people. Like, they taught me all of that before I ever entered school. But I don't know, I guess it didn't sink in, right? And so I can remember going to school and watching the other kids, and I wanted to fit in. I always felt like I was a square peg, trying to just go into a circle, like just trying to fit in. And I would try to figure out what I thought you wanted me to be, and then I would be whatever that was. And when I was 14, and it's funny how the story's changed. When I first started speaking, I would have told you that it was this great big clubhouse. It was really just a abandoned like a building that they played loud music in. It was not a club at all. It was, but when I walked outside, there was a circle, and they were passing around Boone's Farm wine. Okay, only in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting do people laugh whenever I say that. I've said that to my mom, and she does not, she finds no amusement in it. So they're passing around this Boone's Farm, and I want to be liked, I want to be a part of, and so I go and I stand in the circle, and they pass me it, and I take a drink like this, and I'm pretty sure that's how my face looked, because it tasted awful, and it burnt going down my throat, and then it hit that spot. And if you're an alcoholic of my nature, you know exactly what spot that is. I felt like for the first time in my life I could breathe, like I'd been holding my breath for so long, and I could finally breathe, that I could fit in, I could just kind of just be for the first time. And I didn't know that. I had been suffering from alcoholism. Dave said it best last night. Ism. I separate myself. I had been suffering from that my entire life. And with that one drink of alcohol, I felt as if I was a part of. And they passed that drink, that bottle around, and I kept drinking and drinking. And here's how my drinking always ended up. I would throw up and throw up and throw up, and then I'd drink some more, and then I'd throw up, and I'd throw up blood, and then it was kind of over. And that I thought that's what people did. Like, everybody just continued to drink. I didn't know that I suffered from this thing called phenomenon of craving. That once it's in my system, I don't have any control over it. I can't stop it. And so that first drink, put me in that place. And, the crazy thing is, this is how funny God is. I was spending the night at my friend's house that night, and driving home in her parents' Jeep, and it was kind of windy roads like this. And you ever been in a backseat drunk on windy roads? Well, he had a brand new Jeep. I proceeded to throw up all over. It was just disgusting. And so that night they brought me into her parents' room, and I remember her dad talked to me about AA that night. The first night I got drunk, I was talked to about AA. Now, if you don't see the humor in that, right? And I just kind of, whatever. And so I love the effect produced by alcohol, right? And my parents, they had a little bit of alcohol in their house, but I didn't drink. I was 14. I didn't drink every day at that point. I couldn't. But I could remember how that made me feel. I remember one morning waking up and thinking, man, if I could just get a hold of a little bit of their alcohol, I could go to school, and I would be the popular girl. I would fit in. And it's funny how my perception was, because I have talked to schoolmates since then, and their perception was, you were really popular. You were friends with everybody. I don't remember that. That is not how I remember it. And so I ended up I graduated high school, and I decided I wanted to go to X-ray school because I didn't want to go to college, because I didn't want to be in a dorm. I did not want to have to live in close quarters with other women. Now, funny enough, later on in my life, I got to live in very close quarters with other women against my will. And so I went to X-ray school, and I there was a time that I got pulled into the director's office, and they said, we think you have a problem. And I said, I think you're crazy. How dare you say that? I have good grades, and I did have good grades, and there was nothing they could do about it. But looking back, I see, again, here's God at 21, trying to get my attention. And I was my ego was so big, you couldn't tell me anything. I was defiant. I was stubborn. I was unbelievably, I had this ego that you just were not going to break through, And so at that point, when I graduated from X-ray school, I got a job at a local hospital, and I hooked up with this guy, and I decided that I didn't want to live here anymore. I didn't want to live in Pennsylvania, so I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. That was my first geographical change. And that was my first, although I moved 10 more times in 10 years. I am a slow learner. I did not know that every time I moved, I took me with me, Like I didn't get that. And so I went from North Carolina back to Pennsylvania, and in that process, I got this job, and it was a great job, And I hear people say all the time, if I just had enough money, I'm sorry, I'm really hot, I have to take this off. They would say, I'll be okay. If I just had enough money, I could get sober. Well, I got this job, and I was flying all over the country, and I was making six figures, and I foreclosed on my house in North Carolina. So that tells you what I was doing with my money, right? Whenever you fly a lot, you get upgraded to first class. You know what you get in first class? Free drinks. It's the best, right? And I was making enough money that I could also consume non-conference approved dry goods also. So I was spending my money on all kinds of things, and I didn't have any money to pay the house payment, and so, I foreclosed on that house in North Carolina, and I end up back in Pennsylvania, and I was there for a little while, and then I convinced my boss if I just moved to the beach. I mean, really, the beach will cure my alcoholism. I'm quite sure that it will. And I didn't say that to him. I didn't know I had alcoholism at that point in time, but I moved to the beach. And I thought, this is it. This is it. I'm gonna straighten out. It's gonna be better this time. And I get to the beach, and I can remember going on that job. We went to Puerto Rico for a sales conference, and on the way back, there was me and like the head of the company and my boss and some other people, and I was so drunk on the plane that I fell out of my seat. Not once, not twice, like 4 times, I think. Shortly after that, after much years of inventory, I can tell you that I got fired from that job. I used to say that I got let go because Medicare reimbursements changed. I got fired because I couldn't show up at work. I remember once I called and told my boss that the flight got canceled. I couldn't get to where I needed to go, and he called me back 10 minutes later and said, I don't know what you're talking about. There's a flight. And in that 10 minutes, I had already convinced myself that I was absolutely telling the truth. I could not differentiate truth from false. Like, I would tell myself lies to make sure that I could drink as I wanted to drink, that I could do the things that I wanted to do. And I thought that I wasn't hurting anyone. And so there I am, I'm living in Virginia Beach, and, my mom would call me, and I wouldn't answer the phone because, what did I have to say? You're bothering me, I'm not talking to you. And then I would, hit the end button. And I remember once she left me a message, and she said, please call me back. If you don't call me back, I'm going to call the state police to have them come to your house so that I know if you're alive or dead. And I thought, what a witch. How dare she do that? I will tell you that today, because I practice the principles that I have been taught in this program, when my mom calls me, I answer. My mom suffered from my alcoholism. She still suffers from my alcoholism. I brought this disease into my family, and I hurt every single person that was around me. And so I'm in Virginia Beach, and I don't have that job, but I had a really good idea. I was full of grand ideas when I was drinking. Now see, that company, they had stock, and I was fully vested in their stock because the company had mammogram equipment, and it like skyrocketed. So I thought, if I cash in this stock, I can live as I want to live, and I don't have to work. It sounded like a win-win proposition. So that's what I did, cashed in the stock. And it was a nice sum of money, and I was okay. I had the money to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't even have to work. So it didn't stop me. My drinking wasn't stopped. And then that money ran out, and it was like, it must have been around January, February, and I thought, well, I'll just file my taxes, right? I'll get a tax return, and now I don't have to work anymore. Well, I went to file those taxes, and it turned out that I owed the IRS $100,000 because I didn't pay tax. If you cash in stock, here's just a tip: pay the taxes on it. I'm just saying, pay the taxes. So as a good alcoholic, you know what I did, right? I took that return and it went right in the garbage. Like, I'm not doing this. And so I was out of money, I was out of options, and those horrible parents that I have, said, okay, you can move home. And so I said, okay, and I ended up moving home, and I remember again packing that U-Haul and saying, okay, I can do it this time. There's no way I'm going to continue living the way that I'm living in my mom's house. One, if you knew my mom, I mean, people that know my mom, like, she's pretty, she can be mean. I mean, she's not. So I thought, this will, they did not spare the rod in the so I moved home, and that lasted, like 2 days, right? And I'm back at doing what I'm doing. But one of the things they said I had to do was I had to get a job. So I got 2 jobs. Really not because they said to or to impress them, but because I needed 2 jobs in order to continue to do what I was doing. I needed that money in order to do it. And one of the jobs I had was in close to Pittsburgh, so it was about 45 minutes away. And those horrible parents of mine even gave me a vehicle to drive. And so on October 15, 2007, I was driving my father's truck home, and I should have never been behind the wheel. Now, I did not drink that day, but I had a prescription of medication that produces the same effect that alcohol produces on your brain. On that prescription bottle, it says, take as needed. Now, I thought I needed way more than what the bottle, said. And so I'm driving home, and I was merging from one interstate to another, and I saw a tractor trailer, and I saw a motorcycle, and I thought, oh, that's weird, what are they doing? And then I felt a bump on the front of my dad's truck. And so I pulled over because I didn't really know what happened, and when I pulled over and I got out of the truck, a guy screamed, "You just hit someone." And so I ran over, and I saw the man there, and I'd worked in a trauma center when I worked in Charlotte, and I knew what dead looked like, and I knew he was dead, but I tried to do CPR. I did everything that I could. And I'll tell you what, when I was doing CPR on that man that I had just hit, all I could think about was, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me. To me, because I am selfish and I am self-centered, and I am all I can think about. I thought, oh, my life is a nightmare. Not once did I think, this poor man. I didn't even think about him. And I remember the state cop came and he said, we got to find out who did this. And I told him the only honest thing I did that night, and I said it was me. And he took me and he put me in the police car. It's the first time I'd ever been in a police car, although I should have been in them way, way before that, long before that. And he takes me to the hospital. They do the blood alcohol, and they did everything. And he took me to the state police barracks, and they let me go that night. And in the next 4 months, actually in the next 8 months, I ended up having 3 more DUIs. A normal person would have been like, oh, I got to get help. And the truth is I did. I went to a counselor, but not once did I tell them how much I drank. It says in our book, like, if we were ever honest with counselors or psychiatrists, they would probably treat us a whole different way. But I didn't have the capacity to be honest, right? I remember I went to a rehab in that time frame, and I was there for 10 days, and I thought, oh my God, I am not like, well, first, when I walked in, they said to me, oh, are you the new counselor? And I thought, you're right, I don't belong here. That my ego just, and after 10 days, I was out, AMA, I was out because I didn't belong there. And I was out after 10 days, and 2 hours after getting home, I was back to doing what I was doing because I couldn't stop. I have a mind that'll tell me I can have just one, and it'll convince me, like, it will absolutely convince me I can have just one. And then I have one, and I can't stop. I can't stop. And so it took them a year to come and charge me. And I'll tell you, when you hear that, on the door, I felt a kind of a sense of relief, I'll be honest. Because I hated myself, and I hated what I had become, and I hated my life, and I really just wanted to die. And I thought, man, this is my chance. And so they charged me with vehicular homicide, DUI, and a whole bunch of other charges, and they take me to the county jail. And I remember trying to take the sheet to kill myself, and I couldn't figure it out. I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, And so I was there for 4 months, and then I got bailed out. And I'll tell you, in that 4-month time, I met some people from AA. They would come in and do their nice little, stories. They'd come in and bring an AA meeting, and I thought, that's good for you, but you people have not done what I have done. Like, that's not probably going to work for me. But thank you for letting me get out of myself for an hour. I appreciate it. And so they let me at 4 months, and at 4 months I thought, I got this, right? Like, I hadn't been physically removed from alcohol in 10, 12, 14 years. I'd never gone more than a day without something. And so 4 months was a big deal, right? And I remember thinking, I got this. I'm good. And I'm sitting, if you've ever been in jail, if you've never been in jail, God bless you, but I was in a few. And so there's a Sally Port, it's called a Sally Port, and it's like in between jails here, freedom's here, and then the Sally Port. And I remember sitting in the Sally Port, and the thought crossed my mind, it's been 4 months, Heidi, you'll be all right to have one when you get out. And I thought, you're probably right. And so before I ever got out, there I am back off to the races. And so I ended up on June 10th, 2009. At that point, I went back to my parents, and I lived in a trailer, and then I went to, at one point I was living in a tent out in the woods. I lived in this garage, and I don't mean like Airbnb garage. I mean like they pulled their cars out, and we put an egg crate down to sleep in. That's what my life had become. And so at this point, we're staying at this woman's house, and we weren't paying rent or anything, but we were staying there. You know how we do. I used to say I was never homeless. What a lie, I was homeless. My parents just left the light on for me. Now, they would have let me come home. However, I didn't want to stop doing what I was doing, and they were no longer willing to watch me kill myself. And so I'm at this house, and I had a pillow. There was food. There was booze at the house this day. There was non-conference approved dry goods. It was not the worst day of my life. And I was taking a walk through the woods. I love the woods. I've always loved the woods. And I was at this place, and I just, the book talks about it, right? And it says that you get to that point where, you can't live with alcohol and you can't live without it. And it's like you're at this jumping off place, and you're lonely, and you can't take it anymore. And I had this decision, did I want to go on to the bitter end, or was I willing to take spiritual help? It was like I didn't know that's what was going on. Looking back, I can see that. And I just cried out, God, take me. Now, what I meant by that was God, you're so great. Have a lightning bolt come and just take me. Take me out of this world. I can't do it anymore. And so I get back to the house, and there was that. And that was my pre-probation officer. And she came, and she took me right to jail. She did. And I'll tell you, God's funny, right? So I had a 3-county tour in 10 days because I had charges, in different counties. And I ended up in Mercer County. And there was this chaplain there. And he had studied the Oxford group. He had studied the steps. And he said, I'll work with anybody. Anybody that wants to be worked with or work with. And that was my introduction into the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because at that point in time, I knew I couldn't live with me. Now, I thought that I was going to live the rest of my life in prison, and I was perfectly okay with that, but I couldn't live with me in my head anymore. And so I started that process, and I don't know what happened, but even with the charges that I had, they let me out on house arrest, which was crazy. People couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And so I'm on house arrest. I have this house arrest officer, and she's like, you need to go to meetings, and this is what you can get out to do, blah, blah, blah. And so I picked the meetings, and I'll be honest with you, that first meeting that I was going to go to, I was so scared of you guys. So scared, I talked myself out of it. Called my house arrest officer, did the thing that I always do. I lied and said, I couldn't get to the meeting, and she called me out on it. And she wasn't even nice about it. She used swear words and everything, and it hurt my feelings. And so that Saturday morning, I went to the Saturday morning Big Book, and it was all I know that it was a bunch of men sitting around a table, and they were reading the Big Book, and I just cried. All I did was cry. I can't tell you what they talked about. I just cried. And there was a man there, and his name was Charlie, and he looked at me, and he said, we just want you to keep coming back. Now, at that point, no one had told me to come back. My parents had let me do house arrest at their house because I have amazing parents. But I had no friends. I had nobody. I had absolutely nothing. And that brought me to tears that he said, come back. And he gave me a piece of paper with 2 women's phone numbers. He said, call these women, they'll help you. And I didn't want to call them. I got home and the sweat's going from under the armpit. It's like that first date when you call somebody, right? And I called that first woman, and she talked to me, and she said, the other woman lives closer to you. Why don't you call her and see if she can pick you up for a meeting? And that's the first time I spoke to Cindy, and I called her, and I said, I don't know what I said, but I needed a ride. She said, what meeting do you want to go to? I'll be there to pick you up. And that's what she did. She picked me up for every meeting that I had and I was on house arrest for 3 months, and she would pick me up and she would take me to a meeting. And if you talk to the people in Grove City, Pennsylvania, they will tell you that I went to that meeting and I cried. That's all I did was cry. That's all I could do. I'd held it in for so long, I just cried. And and I remember we were at a meeting and somebody was talking about higher power, and I'd been praying. Somebody said about sponsor, and somebody said something in the meeting, and Cindy explained it to me when we got home, and it was my answer. And I said to her, "Will you be my sponsor?" And it was really funny because here I am on house arrest, and she's a retired correctional officer. And I thought, if God doesn't have, right? Like, how funny is that? And so I go to sentencing, and in that point, because I'd done those Oxford steps with that chaplain, like I knew what I had to do. I knew that we made direct amends to the people we'd harmed, and I had harmed that man's family, deeply harmed them. And they lived in Maryland. I didn't know that I'd ever see them again, and so I knew I had to make direct amends in that courtroom. And so what I did was I tried to write this letter, and every night I would call Cindy and I'd read it to her, and I'm like, "This isn't right," and she's like, "That's okay. You're not going to read it to him tonight. Put it down, and we'll do it again." And when the time came that I had sentencing, when the judge said, "Do you have anything to say for yourself, to be sentenced?" I said, "I don't, but I'd like to read this letter." And I turned to that man's family, and I was able to make direct amends to them. They didn't run up and hug me or anything, but there was something that changed in that courtroom. Like, it was a shift in the atmosphere. And I'll tell you, I was standing, kind of on a platform like this. And me, who had no friends months before, when I looked out, that entire courtroom was filled with people from AA. And I will be forever grateful for that. AA shows up when you need them. They absolutely show up. And so my sentencing in Pennsylvania, if you have a vehicular homicide with DUI, it's an automatic 3 years in the state penitentiary. The God of my understanding is a God of grace. And that judge said to that man's family, they agreed that he could separate those charges, which meant that judge could then charge me with whatever he wanted. That judge put me in jail for 10 to 24 months, with 4 months served on work release. I should have been in a state prison. And I don't know how that works. I don't know how any of it works. And I got out, and I went to work, and I would call my sponsor, and I would do everything that I was told to do. I'd go to the AA meetings, that came into the jail, and I just wanted to live this life the right way. And and I got out, and my brother had a trailer behind my parents, and I was living there, and I continued to work at that job that I had on work release, and and Cindy and I had started to go back through the steps, and I was supposed to not really. I don't know what I was supposed to do or not do, but I met this guy, and he had been on work release too, and and isn't that where you meet your soulmate? It's just a thing, and I remember telling Cindy about him, and she said, "You need to do an inventory and find out why you can't be alone." 10 years later, I did that inventory, and I was able to. But at the time, I did not do that inventory, and I thought it to see fit to get pregnant and move him in. Now, I'll tell you that, I had given God my alcohol. I had given him the non-conference approved dry goods. I had given those things. But I really thought that I could take care of my relationships and my money. God's busy. He's got all you drunks to keep sober, right? I was doing him a favor. And so, I moved him in, and 2 people that are spiritually sick do not get well. I mean, we ended up, so I have this beautiful baby, right? And she is just amazing. And, we laugh because I say, she went to AA meetings before she was ever born. And she, when I had her, I hemorrhaged, and they said, you should not have any more kids. Like, you are not capable of, don't get pregnant again. And, I like to play God in my own life. And so I immediately got pregnant again. And it was a high-risk pregnancy, and they said, you've got to go, got to go to Pittsburgh, and I went to Pittsburgh every week. And by this time, I had gone back to school, and I got a job, and I'm married, and I think that things are, my life is getting big because of what you've taught me to do. So my life got big, and my activity in Alcoholics Anonymous got very small. I went to my home group I went to my home group. That's it. And I called my sponsor sometimes. That's what, because I thought I was okay. I didn't realize that. And so this high-risk pregnancy, I go to my home group, and it was a 12 and 12, unless you had a problem. Well, by God, Heidi had a problem every single week. And I would hold that meeting hostage about my fears, about poor me, and my self-pity, and you guys were patient, tolerant, and loving. If that were me now, I don't know that I would be that patient, kind, and tolerant to anybody. But you guys would tell me to live in today. We need to live, like you said, live in today, right? You would tell me that there's great prayers for fear, that I could ask God to remove the fear and direct my thoughts to who He would have me be. You would say things like, let's think about what we're grateful for. Who is God, and God is everything, or God is nothing, and you would tell me all this stuff, and I would hold on to it, and then I'd go to the doctor, and then I'd go back to the meeting, and you'd have to tell me again because I'm a slow learner, right? And so on February 16th, 2013, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. And 8 hours later, that boy died in my arms. And I'll tell you that in those 8 hours, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't thinking about anything. I was his mom. And I sang to him, and I prayed with him, and I have beautiful memories. And I know exactly where he is, and I know exactly where I'm going. And that's okay. And I can talk to you about that without any, it's not that I am not emotionless about it. I'm free. And the reason that I'm free from his death is because of what Alcoholics Anonymous taught me to do in the inventory process. You guys were there with me in the ICU. I died a couple of times giving birth to him. A couple of times after he passed, I passed, and it's funny, I run into the doctor that night that was there that night, sometimes in that small town, and he looks at me and he says, "I don't know how you're alive. I really have no idea how you're alive." And again, my God is so great, He's so great. And so the year after his death, it was rough. It was really rough. It was a Saturday night that he was born, and Cindy would come to my house on Saturdays. Some nights we wouldn't even talk, but she just knew that I couldn't be alone. And, my kid's dad, he worked a lot. That was his way to kind of, cure himself, I guess. And, and then he ended up picking up, and I used to blame him. How could you? How could you? And I love our 4-step, right? I look at our 4-step and I do that 4-column inventory, and I look at who am I resentful at? Why am I resentful? What does it affect of me? But then it says, this is our course. Is it possible that he is spiritually sick? And I think, man, if I didn't have it, if I were going through this without a sponsor, if I were going through this without the steps, if I were going through this without knowing how to write inventory, what would I do? Man, I would have been drunk in a bar too. And it completely changed my perception. Now, it didn't completely change my actions, but it did change my perception, and so it got bad. It got really bad, and he ended up, I ended up asking him to leave, and but in the process of that, I was a control freak. I was manipulative. I was. It's funny, Dave and I have talked about it, and he's like, I wouldn't have wanted to live with you either. I was bad. It was horrible. He has his own inventory, but I had to look at myself, And so there I am, and it's my daughter and I don't drive, I have no driver's license, and I was living on page 52, having trouble with financial relationships, fear of financial insecurity, crying at everything, an emotional wreck. And I didn't know that I was suffering from alcoholism. You could have told me over and over again, but I didn't hear it. I went to one meeting a week. I tried some church, I was going to church, and I was doing I was going to counseling, all that stuff. And I love church. I think counseling is great. But it wasn't curing my alcoholism, and so I go to a meeting, and that home group, that poor home group, they're probably glad I'm not a member anymore. So I was there, and one night, I don't know what I said, but a home group member pulled me aside, and he said to me, hey, there's some prayers in the big book. Why don't you try them? They're on page 86. And they go something like this. Upon awakening, we ask God to direct our thoughts. We ask him to divorce us from self-pity. We can just stop right there. And I looked at him and I thought, who the heck do you think you are? You have no idea you have not lived what I have lived. Now, this is all in my head, mind you. I'm having this conversation in my head. How dare you tell me to pray? I went to seminary. You think I don't know how to pray? And I thought, well, I will prove you wrong, buddy. I'll go home and I'll try to find my big book so that I can pray those prayers. And so I found my big book and I started praying those prayers. And I'm not kidding you, within a week, something changed. Something changed in me. My circumstances were exactly the same, but alcoholism isn't about circumstances. Alcoholism isn't even in a bottle. Alcoholism comes in people. And I was suffering. And those prayers, I started to get connected. And it was like that first time you taste something sweet and you just want more. I love the effect produced by God and I wanted more. And so I'm like, where did you find this stuff? How did you know? It's in the big book, I didn't know. I couldn't hear. My eyes weren't open. I wasn't awake. And so we started doing these workshops. Dave would come over after a meeting and we would do these workshops that we had heard on these step workshops, and we'd have our books out and we'd be making notes and had a notebook, and people would be like, hey, saw Dave was over at your house late last night. They had no idea. We are like little kids going to class. It was just an amazing, I started to get in touch with God in a way that I never had before. And we started going to these workshops, and we would travel and go to workshops, and what started as a friendship obviously blossomed into a whole lot more. And so at that point in time, I'm doing workshops, and I'm waiting for my divorce to be final, and I have this bad medical problem. Right? I can't move my neck. I can't move it at all. I couldn't look this way. I couldn't move at all. And so I'd gone to surgeons and got x-rays, and they said I had this thing called thoracic outlet syndrome. It sounds good, doesn't it? It makes me sound like I could be a real victim with that. And so I was. I played that out to the T, and because I don't know any better. That's just the way that's how I am. And they said that the only thing that would help it is if they were to cut that rib out. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. Let's cut it out. And Dave just very chalantly says to me, do you have any unmade amends? And I thought, well, I really have made it. I made direct amends to my parents. I started paying them back the money that I owed them. I made direct amends to ex-in-laws. I made direct amends to that man's, family. I'd made amends. I had done it. Except for one, the IRS. Because I was so afraid. I couldn't. And it's not that my sponsor did not tell me to do this. It's not that in a meeting I would bring it up. I remember that first woman that I called, she said something to me like, oh, Heidi, you say you have so much faith. Why don't you put it into action? And I thought, you witch. How dare you? And so Dave said that to me, and I was like, I've made them all, but not the IRS. And he said the same thing that his sponsor said to him, how free do you want to be? And so, ironically, the day that I called them was the day that Cindy was injured, and we had gone to Pittsburgh to the hospital and seen her. There was a group of us that went down to see her, and we went home. I went home that night, and that afternoon, something in me said it's time to call. And so I called them, and it's not that I hadn't done some footwork before. I wanted to call them. I was just afraid. They had just put Wesley Snipes in the federal prison, and I thought, Wesley Snipes, they're going to put me in prison. But I guess if somebody needs AA in prison, I'll take it, whatever. And that's really the point I'd gotten to. So I called this woman at the IRS, and she's like, you need form, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have it. I'd filled it out. Gave her all the information. I said, I can pay you $20 a month on $100,000. I'd like to set up some payments. And that's what she did too. She laughed in my face. She laughed. But by the end of the conversation, she's like, I can't believe that you have to mow your yard with the amount of rent that you have to pay. It's ridiculous. And I said, I know. And I thought, she's on my side. And so 2 weeks later, I ended up getting in the mail a letter from the IRS that I opened, and it said to me, well, you can make $20 a month payments. We'll send you the envelope to make those payments. And the other thing that I got was my final divorce papers from my kid's dad. So I went to a meeting that night, and for the grace of God, I'm talking about the grace of God, crying again at a meeting. And I go home that night, and I went to put on my pajamas, and for the first time in years, I could move my neck. Our book tells us that when the spiritual malady is in alignment, is in place, so are the physical and the mental. And I've experienced that. And so Dave and I I hate the cold. I hate it. And I wanted to go to the beach. So I said to him, I want to go to the beach, thinking we'd go to Florida. And he said, great, let's go to LA. And I said, all right, whatever. And he wanted to meet Clancy. He wanted to go to the Pacific Group. It used to be the largest AA group. It was like a convention, 1,000 people, 80 people on the coffee committee. And I thought, okay, great, I'll go, whatever. Can I go to the beach? That's all I really cared about. And so we go there, and in the midst of 1,000 people, we were talking to a woman that we had gotten to know, and we said we want to go to the Midnight Mission. That's where Clancy is. And she said, oh, Susie, my friend Susie, she volunteers there on Thursdays the next day. Let's see if we can find her. She turns, and of course you know who's standing right there, right? Susie. And so we go with Susie, and if you've never been to Skid Row, if you don't know anything about Skid Row, it is a 50-block radius in Los Angeles that there are homeless people. There are tents lining up the streets. There are people who have no other place to go to the bathroom. People are smoking things, and they're drinking things, and it is like a third world country, and it is desperate and hopeless, and you walk in, and that's what you see. But as you walk into the Midnight Mission, you see step 1. We are powerless over alcohol, and our lives have become unmanageable. Step 2, and it has all 12 steps that lead you into the Midnight Mission. And when you open the doors, there's something that hits you. I don't know if it's the grace of God. I don't know what it is, but there's something. And you start to talk to the people that work there, and most of the people that work there used to live on Skid Row. And now they have these big, beautiful lives. And we got to serve the community there. And we got a tour, and we get in our car to leave, and I started weeping. And I said, I got to come back here. I have to be a part of this. And so we went home, and we just tried to save as much money as we could, and we would go back to LA like every couple months, and I'd volunteer at the Midnight Mission, and we ended up in 2019. I was applying to jobs. Now Dave had done school. He had a job that he could transfer. He'd easily transfer it. I didn't, and so I ended up just applying to these jobs, and it was crazy because at the time I had been given this job that I could work from home, and I wrote my own job description. Like if you could have a job that you wanted, that was my job. And yet I had this yearning in me to be a part of what was going on out there. And so I applied for this job at an orthodontics office. I don't know anything about teeth. I don't know anything about braces. And they gave me a job. And so in 2019, we ended up selling the house. We sold everything in it, and we packed up the car, and we moved to California. I mean, literally just what we could fit in the car, and we moved out there. And so I worked at this orthodontist office for a couple weeks, and I hated my coworker. I couldn't stand her. Like, she was a liar, and she was so annoying, and I would call my sponsor, and I would be like, this girl is on my nerves. I can't stand her. And she'd be like, maybe you need to write inventory. So I wrote inventory, and what I came up with was I remember all those times I lied. And I didn't lie because I was a pathological liar. I lied because I was afraid. And I thought to myself, she's afraid. I know about fear. My God, my life, I made every decision based on fear for years. Maybe I could help her. God, how can I be of service? Like you guys taught me. And I'm not kidding you, when I made that perception change, when I made that in my head, because I thought, here I am, working on rich people's teeth. They're already straight. They want them straighter and whiter. What is wrong with these people? I wanted to be in Skid Row. I like them down there. I can relate to them. And I get this email, and they said, we've got this position at the Midnight Mission. Would you be interested? And so I wanted to call a fork the next day and go there. And I was advised to not do that, to say to my work, I need Friday off, and to do it in proper channels. So I listened, and I did that, and I went down and I interviewed, and they gave me this job, and it was to be a community event coordinator, and I was supposed to have these music events and art events for the homeless community, and I'd be able to sit down and talk to people, and I was like flying high, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is real. And so I started the Midnight Mission, and then COVID hit. And I didn't get to do one event, not one, mind you. However, my boss had said, we need somebody that can write. I know you can write. A couple months back, we had gone to visit a man that he's become one of my spiritual teachers in AA, and he had done this meditation with us. It's called a love meditation. If you can pick it up, it's Scott Lee Love Meditation, and it changed my life. I never really meditated. I didn't understand that. I thought it was like, and I wasn't into that. But this meditation is about sending love, just about sending love to family and to the community and to the universe. And it was just a beautiful, one time I was doing that meditation, and I'll tell you, I saw my little boy. He was running through a field of butterflies, and he was laughing, and I can still hear that laughter. And so after this meditation, I would start writing these little devotionals, and I would send them to Scott. And he, after a couple months, he's like, you got to share these. And so I started sharing them on Facebook. Like, I would write, and I would share, and I would write, and I would share. My boss at the Midnight Mission said, I've seen what you can write. I know you can write. And so I started writing all their social media, doing their press releases. Her and I, it's funny now, she would tell my coworkers, Heidi's my better half, and then they get upset because they're alcoholics too, and they're sensitive, and so she has to figure something out. And so I'm writing, and things are going good, and then they shut everything down. And my daughter had been there for 3 weeks, and they shut school down. And so she had she didn't have any friends. She had she had one friend in our apartment complex. But we had to figure out what to do. We had no family. We had just started, trying to cultivate AA relationships. They shut down all the AA meetings. And so we did the best that we could. Dave changed jobs so that he could be home with her, and he did homeschool, and they would drive me to Skid Row and drive me back. And my mom was really sick at this time, so it was just like there was a lot going on, and we're praying, and our lease was up in June, and we both prayed, and we felt like God said, go home. And I'll tell you, I was not very happy with God, because I thought, why would you do this? Why would you put me in this place that I want to be in, that I love so much, and now you're going to take me out of it? And funny enough, the old job that I had in Pennsylvania, I was conversing with my boss, and he said, why don't you just come home and help me? And I said, okay, that's the plan. And so I ended up, he told me, okay, you got your job back. You can have your job. It's reinstated. It's yours. So I knew that I had a job, but it wasn't the Midnight Mission. But I knew, our principles say, right, that first tradition, we want to do what's best for the whole. And I had to do what's best for my whole family. And so I went in, and when I quit, my boss is one of us, and I said, Georgia, I got to do what's right for my whole family. I got to move home. And she said, thank you very much. And that's it. And the next day, she called me into her office, and she said, Mike, who's the CEO of the Midnight Mission, he said he doesn't want to lose you. And so would you be willing to stay on part-time and continue to work for us remotely? And so today I get to continue to work for the Midnight Mission. Dave and I got married in California amidst riots and curfews, and it was pretty amazing. And we got to ride bikes down the California coast, and then when we moved home, we again sold absolutely everything, and we actually took less back from California back to Pennsylvania. When we went to buy our house, we were looking at houses, and because I had 2 jobs at the time, and he was going to have to, find a job back in Pennsylvania, they actually put my name on a mortgage. Now, I know that's not a big deal, but when you've lived the life that I lived, I cried. I absolutely cried when I signed that mortgage. So we moved back home, and I have have these 2 jobs, and I have this house, and I have this community. And, I was taking a walk the other day, and a guy I heard somebody say from behind, Heidi Struble, and I turned around, and the words were, we're so glad you're back. And I thought, I've gone from this place where nobody wants me to be to an entire community that's so glad that I'm back. How does that happen? And so it's funny, on October, I told you that accident happened on October 15th, 2007. On October 15th, 2020, I get a call from the state representative in Pennsylvania. Now, I had lost my license till 2024. That's what they had said. No holds bar, you're done. And I was okay with that. And I'll tell you, if you're new here and you say, I don't have a driver's license, I can't get to a meeting, for 13 years, I got to a meeting. I went across the country and back without a driver's license. That is not an excuse. That does not work well. And so I ended up, the state representative called me and they said, you can get your license back. And I was like, what? So I bought a car and did insurance and, got the interlock, and then they said, oh, wait, we need this. Oh, wait, we need this. So I bought the car in October and I'm paying all these payments, right? And I didn't actually get to drive until mid-January. And I'll tell you, there was moments in that time frame that it's snowing and it's cold and I need to go somewhere, and I'm thinking, I could just drive it. It's been this long, I can just drive it. But you guys have taught me to be honest. You guys have taught me that that's not the way that we live. I can't do dirty things and live a spiritual life. You taught me that step 10, where it says continue, right? I continue to watch for resentment, for fear, for dishonesty. And it's not so much lies that I say, lies that I lie to you. It's the lies that I tell myself. Those lies that you're not good enough. You're never going to amount to anything. Those are the lies. And I ask God to remove them. And I call somebody. I recently was in a little lifting injury, and I look at it now, and I see how I was believing that lie. You're not good enough. You got to do more, run more, lift more, do more. Because if you don't look good, they're not going to like you. All that old lie, my sponsor and I went over that. But in that time frame, I was in a lot of pain, and I would call her and I'd be like, I am suffering from self-pity. And my family is suffering from it also. Or they're suffering because I am suffering from this. And you guys taught me how to do that. So when I open my day, I wake up and I still do the exact same thing. I ask God to direct my thoughts. I ask him to divorce me from fear, from self-pity, from delusion. And I ask him, how can I be of service today? I get out of bed and I go downstairs and I make coffee because my God likes to have coffee with me. And I write. I just write these letters. I call them my love letters to God. And sometimes I write and I'll ask him a question and I'll just sit silently, and then I write again, and it's so funny how the answers do come if we work for him. If your house is in order, just like they tell us. When I came home, the relationships that I'd had with people weren't the same. They just weren't the same. I think there was a piece of maybe that they felt that I had abandoned them. And so I had to learn how to cultivate new relationships. I had to learn how to be intentional, how to love people where they were at, not where I thought they should be, because you guys taught me how to do that. That's what you did for me, right? So I asked God, I say, how can I help the still suffering alcoholic? And it's crazy. The other day he said, to contact this one woman. And I called her, or I texted her actually, and she had said that her fiance's dad had just died, and that, she was going through it. It's crazy how God will do that to you. And I read 2 pages of the big book every day. If I do that, I can get through the big book 4 times a year. I know exactly where my big book is today. And then I'll take a line and I'll share it with some women that are in my life. I have a home group, and I didn't pick my home group. They ran me down and picked me. They made me go to that home group. Literally, they came to my house and got me. It's a block away. It's Thursday nights, Grove City Church of the Nazarene. It's a speaker meeting. If you ever are in around the area or want to take a really long road trip, come on up. It's at 7 o'clock on Thursday nights. I'll cook you dinner. And then I go about my day and I ask God, how can I be a good employee? How can I be a good mom? How can I be a good wife? Show me the way. And then at night, I do that love meditation, and there's a great inventory on page 86. There's some questions I ask myself. And I don't hold myself in a state of, it says that we don't do it with morbid self-reflection, right? It's not a how bad was Heidi today. It's what lessons have I learned? What do I need to change so that I can be better tomorrow? That I can be a better servant of God? Because that's really what this is all about. This is about connecting with God so that then we can be his agent. I heard a man say that, God is the master, and the master crafts these tools. And the master will always pick the tool that's closest to him. And I want to be as close as I can to the master so that I am the tool that he uses. Thank you for letting me be a tool tonight.